Morning everyone, this is the second video, part 2 of our myths about lasers. I'm actually at Alton Towers, and as I'll talk through in a moment, quite relevant for this subject. So I'm going to talk about wavelengths and the importance of wavelengths. So we talked about power and class last time, and obviously the importance of having power where it's needed, but obviously class of laser relates specifically to how much power and obviously the health and safety implications of that. Also the irradiance level, but again we'll talk about that later. So with our wavelengths, there used to be a lot of misconceptions and maybe misinformation out there where people would talk about depth of penetration and power. You know, the more power, the better the depth of penetration. Actually, it's more the wavelength that's important for penetration. So if we don't have the right wavelength, actually that energy is not going to go that far, or it's going to get absorbed by the wrong things. So with wavelength, if we go back to our school days and think about the electromagnetic spectrum, so we know 600 to 1100 nanometers is what we call the therapeutic window. So if we use a wavelength in this window, we're going to get a therapeutic effect on tissue. Now, even though we have this quite big window, that's still actually not quite straightforward, because, you know, 600 nanometers isn't that long actually, compared to 1100. And also some of those wavelengths are better at absorbing or being absorbed by different chromophores than others. So we want our energy to reach the right target tissue. Now, depending on which wavelength you're going to use will depend on, is that possible to get that energy there, and are we going to get enough energy to that spot as well? So for example, if we use more that 600 end, then the problem there is that this is more likely to be absorbed by melanin and kind of superficial tissues. So fine for our wound management and for our superficials, not so great for, you know, deep tissue conditions, because it's not really going to get the energy there. If we use, let's say, 980, great wavelength for pain management, really good wavelength for that. However, it is easily absorbed in water. So we then might use something like 810, where this is a good wavelength for general photobiomodulation and just kind of incurring that. But again, there are some reasons why we may not use that wavelength, you know, absorption into, again, melanin, hemoglobin, all these different things. So yes, we know the therapeutic window, it's 600 to 1100 nanometers. However, the higher up we go on that spectrum, the further that energy is going to be carried. And then again, if we pick the right wavelengths, even on that higher end, we're going to get better absorption, or it's going to be able to bypass different chromophores before we get too much absorption and not actually get the right amount of energy. Because at the end of the day, we need enough energy at our target tissue to actually saturate those cells and give enough light to the chromophores we want to target. So not quite as straightforward as just pick a wavelength and off we go. And the reason why I say being at Alton Towers is really relevant for wavelengths is, going back to my train analogy, is I view wavelengths like a train track. Now obviously I'm by roller coaster tracks, so not quite the same, but train track. And the reason being is that, you know, we can have lots of different lengths of train tracks. They can either take you a short distance or really far. So again, on that electromagnetic spectrum, if we're picking shorter wavelengths, it's only going to carry that energy so far. If we're using longer wavelengths, then we're going to get a bit further. But the other element to it as well is that, you know, we have our train with our coal, so that's how much power we've got. And then depending on which wavelength or which train track we have, is then going to carry that coal, that power, that light into the relevant tissues that we need to. So wavelength, incredibly important for penetration. If we don't have the right wavelength, actually that light's not going to go anywhere. So again, this is where I'm saying class of laser is not the only consideration. We have to get the right soup, we have to get the right mix of all the different components to get the right response we're looking for. So we've got our class, we've now got our wavelength, so we've got our power and our photons, and now we've got that wavelength that's going to carry that light into the tissues. Again, wavelength, you know, as long as there's light, it's not going to stop necessarily, but it's how far can we get into those tissues without losing too much energy to chromophores that we don't actually want. I hope that makes sense and helps a little bit. Apologies for all the background noise, it's very hard to find a quiet spot here, but I'm going to go and find some wavelengths to go and ride. I will see you guys in the next video, and we're probably going to look at radiance next. So give me a shout if you like the video, if there's any other subjects. I've got lots of myths planned over the next coming weeks that we're going to explore. So hope you all have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.